This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our friends at Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system.
Are your SOPs tied directly to your cultivation plans? Can you easily manage your inventory and workforce and vendors from a single system? Or can you manage compliance across multiple licenses and states? If you answered no to any of these questions, then I suggest you stop what you're doing and call the team at Regrow. Compared to other software systems on the market, when you choose Regrow as a strategic business partner, you'll get all aspects of regulatory compliance built in, with the added value of workforce management, inventory, SOP management, and reporting and metrics that allow for companies to scale successfully. So if you're using whiteboards, spreadsheets, and email to manage your cultivation, distribution, and manufacturing processes, then it's a good time to consider incorporating Regrow. Visit their website at regrow.io. That's regrow.io. Regrow, the premier cloud-based cannabis supply chain management system. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Dylan Livingearth. He's the Senior Implementation Specialist and Solutions Architect at Backbone. Dylan Livingearth, how you doing, man?
Doing well. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, man, I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk with you. For those listening, Dylan and I last week tried to make the recording happen. I had some personal and family issues that came up, so we decided to reschedule. But during that time, Dylan, it was awesome because we got to get to know each other and talk at a high level and prepare for today. So thanks again for being flexible and welcome to the show.
Thanks, it's my pleasure.
Absolutely. So before we recorded and when we talked last week, one thing that stood out to me initially, and this would be kind of a great way to kick this episode off, is to talk about your experiences and what you learned when traveling all around the world about how different cultures and people are using cannabis and what their feelings and thoughts are on cannabis. And when you talked about where you had traveled, you mentioned India, Jamaica. There may have been some other countries, but Dylan, why don't we kick it off there and just talk about the global perspective on cannabis and what you learned on your travels?
Okay, great. Thanks. I came up in Chicago, and being the son of hippie radical parents, cannabis was not a drug. It was a Sunday morning ritual for my mother to relax. But now, being that she is 70 and I'm 52, she's 72, whatever, I have watched in my mother the evolution of cannabis as recreational and medicinal and all of its, facets. I think that's what got me excited as a young person. I was like, what is this? So when I went to college and it was everywhere, and I'm in University of Wisconsin-Madison, I'm realizing there's different kinds. I'm like, oh, there's different kinds, and someone came from Humboldt County and I was like, well, I've never seen anything like this. So let's talk. Kind of blew my mind. And then I got interested in Rastafarianism, a lot of people do. And I was trying to figure out, what are they talking about? Why is this herb divine to some degree to Rasta? What is Babylon? What is all this? What are they talking about? So I became interested and I went there to Jamaica and I started going there pretty much every year and getting involved with the grow community there. It's very non-professional. And I would bring things from America and help build up the water pumps and be part of this grow. And I got interested, but I felt like this was not the beginning. Like they had inherited this. So I was like, well, from where, And I started researching and I learned about India. And I saw the sadhus that looked like Rasta, but they're from India. And I saw them in a book. Most people, hippies, had this sadhu book. Like, what is this? And then when I started being very interested and participating in some of these circles of sharing this chillum, right? Mm-hmm. And they were saying things like Shiva, and then from Jamaica, they're saying Ja and Shiva. And I was like, wait, this is like a parallel. It's just a different name of the same thing, divine spirit.
Right.
So I got interested. And I realized that in India, the sadhus had to actually connect their cannabis with God just to be left alone, because everyone else was like, what are you doing? What is this thing? And they were like, it's divine. We use it to meditate. They were like, well, that's interesting. And in Jamaica, you'll hear the term meditation. So I was like, wait, who's running the show here? The humans or cannabis?
Right.
You know, that's when I
Yeah.
started realizing that we kind of are working for this plant, or we are in communion with this plant in different places on the planet. So I was like, well, what's even older than that? And then I started learning a term called land race, which is stuff that they found growing before everything in Africa. A strain they call Malawi. So there's these like land race strains, like they can't figure out who put them there. So they're so old,
Wow.
that intrigues me. Like the
Yeah.
redwoods, they're so old. We know humans didn't do it. So who did it? The earth, the universe, whatever it is, it's pretty special. So I wanted to realize, what is this speciality? So when I was in Chicago and I started to now work, I really was centered on programs that alleviate poverty. I started in Chicago at a consulting firm called Target Group, which specialized in affirmative action. And then I kind of rose up within city and state government in Illinois to become the director of the Department of Human Services Technology. I was the chief information officer for the Illinois Department of Human Services.
Based off of your like experience growing up with your hippie parents and the travels you did you ever expect yourself to be in a public government position?
Yeah, always did.
Really?
Yeah, because hippie parents are very progressive and they were always about making change, and their kids were part of the revolution. So I always felt like we were part of something, the next thing.
Right.
Just like I believe the younger generation believes they're part of the next thing and want to make it better. And I definitely thought that. And I thought government was the place to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially coming up in Chicago, because it's very democratic. It's very seems grassroots. There's issues, but I was born and raised in the middle of Chicago in Lincoln Park. So I kind of came up in all that. And then as I was deciding what to do, I realized government's a good place to work because there's policy.
Right.
And policy is huge, actually, because you can make you can have big impact. So
and that's where change happens, right? Is at the policy level. So that's where you'd want to be if you'd want to invoke change. That makes sense.
I mean, we wouldn't be having this cannabis legality conversation if it wasn't framed within policy.
Right.
At least now in California. I'm in California. I'm in Humboldt. So I'm in Chicago at the time, state of Illinois. And then I am realizing that, I hope I don't get anyone in trouble, but all the professionals that I know are smoking cannabis. Like 100%.
We won't name any names, but everyone.
But all the way from director to the janitor smoking cannabis. And we came up in the Chicago Housing Authority. That was one of my jobs. I worked at Chicago Housing Authority, Chicago Public Schools, City of Chicago Empowerment Zone, State of Illinois. A lot of programs around economic development, because I was the guy they called the economic impact czar. I always hated that term. But the czar, it really meant the guru of economic impact.
You sound like a lord of economic impact, the czar.
And that's too much, because we all should be it. But what my real job was to assess the economic impact of social programs to see if they were worthy of continuing or should they be changed.
Well, that's important.
It was important. And actually, pre-internet, it was hard to collect all the data. So when I first started, 1992, 93, 94, I came up in fax machines. If there was a project and you needed to report, you had to send something via fax. I knew that wasn't aggregating. It wasn't calculating. So all my friends were in the .com movement. They all lost all their money. But I stayed in policy, and they asked me, how can we collect data? So I started making government applications where if you received money or something from the government, you would report on the internet. And then it automatically aggregated so you could see in real time the impacts.
Wow.
Well, we had a guy in Chicago, a wonderful gentleman named Bobby Rush, Black Panther Party, and he was a representative, and he's on the south side of Chicago. And he was really irritated that the money was not having the impact that he wanted. $40 million from Washington. in Clinton's time and the state combined. So he went on a tirade at the Black Caucus and started saying, this is terrible. We need to take the money back from Chicago. It's terrible. Well, I had just become that week the assistant director of the empowerment zone, and the phone's ringing off the hook. Say, look, you guys are getting your butt kicked. They had hired us to avert that or change that. So I said, oh, he doesn't have the data that I have because I now have all this aggregate data. We need to ship it out to him. There wasn't actually email. You couldn't email PDF. I know this sounds ridiculous, but it was back then. So we put 10 reports together and shipped it out overnight to Washington. The following day, Bobby Rush was up on the podium screaming, I have to take it all back. I have data in my hand now that shows that this is amazing. Wow. And we need more money.
Wow.
Because of that, I got kind of a reputation in Chicago, like, well, go to this guy. If the stuff is whack, get the truth. So I started, Kevin, living in transparency land. I was less interested in manipulating or telling a story and letting the data just tell its own story. I started calling it, even back then, radical transparency, because my parents were radicals. The term is weird. It means a big change, you know? Right. So for me, there was a big change from no transparency and a bunch of talk to full transparency. Make your own mind up on the data,
which is how it should be, at least in my opinion, right? Because today so much you see stats, data, even interviews are taken out of context. They're clipped here, they're clipped there, and it's all positioned to serve a certain agenda on whatever side, right? And data is data. So I love that mindset that you had where, look, just let the data speak for itself, and then you make your own informed decisions based off of the data findings, right?
Yeah, because I think that we're all geniuses. If presented with data, we all have a computer on our shoulders, and some people have used it more than others, but it's all there. So I was like, give everyone the data, let everyone make their mind up. That seemed to work. That propelled me to the state level, state of Illinois. That was different though, because at the state level, when they made me the director, there's a name I'll throw out, Rod Blagojevich hired me. This guy is in jail. He might be pardoned by Trump now, but it was an interesting time. He was a Democrat that swooped in and brought a bunch of progressives, but he wasn't necessarily all that progressive. It's hard to tell. Mm-hmm. Point is that at the state level, I was very interested in now assessing state level programs and actually modernizing the state from 1970, where the machines were bought, to 2010 when I arrived, 2008, 7, 6, something like that. It was a big deal. I call it Googleizing at the time, but it was a big deal. But they asked me to do more with less. They wanted me to modernize the entire state with less money because their agenda was saving money, not spending money. Well, I tried, Kevin, and it was like cutting to the bone over and over. So my soul was starting to get hurt because instead of doing more programs, having more impact, I was helping the state save money by lessening the program.
Right. So the complete opposite of what you kind of entered that position to do.
The complete opposite. And my being was telling me, oh, it's a good position, but you're doing the opposite. No, stay the course because you'll make change. After a while, change wasn't happening. I got a phone call from my friends in California. I have been every year going to something called Rainbow Gathering. People can search it. It's kind of fun. It's a place for families to come and unplug and be in the woods for a week or two annually. Mm-hmm. And it goes around the country. So I had done that and I loved it. And I met some great people, and a lot of them were from California, and they were all talking about this legal market, but they couldn't describe it because it wasn't legal per se. It was here in California. Remember, we wrote it into law. The humans voted it in.
Right.
They had two names, 420 and 215, AB 420 and 215. They were two laws that came about from the humans petitioning that we need this cannabis. And mostly it came out of veterans and people with AIDS and people who really needed this. Probably a lot of what you're seeing in Texas and the newer places we went through 20 years ago. And at that time, I'm a little bit losing train of thought, but now I remember. They invited me to come on in and be a grower. And I had been a professional in front of a computer for 25 years. And now they're saying,
yeah,
you want to
be a grower now, that's totally new.
Totally new. Now, not exactly new because I've been a grower in Chicago forever. I've always had my one little room. It's been a hobby. I've always had a connection with cannabis. And as you said at the beginning, I traveled around.
Right.
Learning cannabis has always been a big part of me. So when they said, do you want to be a grower in this legal market? I got pretty excited.
And that's the commercial grow side. So, a bit different than just a personal grow, still kind of same practices and whatnot, just at a larger scale, right? So
larger scale, no more lights. And the lights were killing me because it was this hippie hypocrisy, we called it, like we want nature, but yet we're creating it from light. So it was whack. So they invited me, hey, come to Mendocino, live on the side of the mountain, grow a bunch of pot. I was like, great. So I came out there. I didn't realize, Kevin, how different things are. There's no salaries. There's no jobs. When you're a grower, you just have a side of a hill and you somehow have to grow something and somehow have to sell it to somebody.
Right.
So it's February. It's freezing. There's snow in Mendocino. And now I'm learning a little bit. My point is, come March, April, May, the sheriff put in the newspaper an ad that said, growers, come out of the woods, so to speak. It said, sign up with the sheriff's office, bring your prescriptions. I didn't explain it, but in California, we had this prescription situation where you could grow medicine if you were growing it for yourself or if you were growing it for others and you were their caretaker. So you could aggregate all these prescriptions into a binder and end up with a certain amount of protection, but it was fuzzy. So when the sheriff said, pretty much surrender yourself and get these zip ties, I was all about it. My people were like, you're an idiot. I was like, no, I'm from government. The government just said, walk on in here and tell us who you are and everything will be fine. And they were like, dude, you're so green. It's crazy.
They're all, you go first.
No, they did. They were like, you go, but don't tell them where you are. I'm like, that's not going to work. We have to go all or nothing. They go, we're not supporting you. There was about 5 of them and me. And I said, look, you want me to bring my daughter here? She's 7 years old. Your children are here. You're acting like you're protected, but I've looked at this. You're not protected right now under the circumstances. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, what do you propose? I said, let's go all in on this sheriff thing. They were like, okay, fine. It was $100 per zip tie, and the sheriff, I think, would give us, 18, 6 times 3. So I go in there, $1,800. It's all the money I had amassed for the spring. So they weren't going to put the money in. I did it, put the money in. And when I walked into the sheriff's office, they looked at me like I was crazy. I was like the first person to take them up on their offer.
Wow.
In Mendocino, because I wasn't local. I wasn't conditioned. You got to understand that for decades, it's been a war in Mendocino and Humboldt between the growers and the sheriff.
I got to tell you, I did not realize that, especially in Humboldt. I mean, I've watched documentaries now and I've kind of learned more about Humboldt, and I just had this different picture. Not to say it's a bad place, and it's obviously changing now and whatnot, but it to your point, I mean, they've been fighting prohibition for a long time, and there's been a lot that's happened in those areas due to prohibition.
A lot. They even had a whole program here called CAMP. It's something about eradication. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's about California marijuana. I don't know. They would drop down, cut your plants down. If they could find you, they'd arrest you. You can imagine these children in the forest, in the woods, are completely traumatized.
Right.
When a helicopter comes over, it's traumatic. Your parents might be going to jail. You don't know what's going to happen. And you definitely have people in your family that have been in jail. Mm-hmm. So when I arrived there, a helicopter did arrive, boom, 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 and it's staring at us. And I was like, whoa, what is this? Because I'm from government. Everything's pretty manageable. And they said, no, it's a free-for-all out here. So when I went in there and I bought the zip ties and I came back and I put them on the plants, my grower friends were like, this was dumb, but okay. Fast forward to the end. Now it's October, because that's how it worked back then. There wasn't light depth. I'll talk about that later. You had full term. Right now, you have to wait till the pot finishes. It's like October. Mm-hmm. And Now you have to trim it all, right? So you got all these people, 40 people, 30 to 40 people descended on this little zone. And it's kind of a party, literally. I'm DJing, we're bringing pot, it's happening. And I look up and there's 15 cop cars snaking down the driveway, coming down to arrest us all.
Oh my gosh.
And my kid is in my van that was our second room, and she's, coloring or whatever. And I had to tell her, look, Shayna, I'm going to need you to get on the floor of this vehicle. And it was scary, Kevin.
Yeah, I can
imagine. And they arrived and they said to me, you're all going to jail. And I said, whoa, slow your roll. I got right here all these prescriptions, all these scripts. And they go, we don't care about scripts. And I go, whoa, I got these zip ties. And they go, whoa, you have the zip ties? And he stopped. It totally changed. And I said, yeah, I have the zip ties. He goes, are they on the plants? I go, well, we're harvesting, but yet we had 25 plants. We were only supposed to have 18. I didn't want them to go down in the garden.
Right.
Nowadays, 25 people have 2,500, by the way. But we had them 25 at like 5 pounds each. We had to train them out so that they were
more yield. Yeah.
Because we wanted to be under the numbers. So he comes down to the garden with his team, and actually the weed grower guy brought him down four-wheeler, comes back up, and he stands in front of me, and I'm ready for him. I have no idea what he's going to say. He says, this is perfect. And that was it. And he turned around and left. All 10 cars. And wow. I swear to God, Kevin, I turned to everyone, I said, California.
You had to change your pants, I bet, at that point.
I did, but I had faith because I was from government. The government said we'd be okay. Right. They showed up and we were okay. And I realized, all right, everybody, this is the beginning. If we do what they say, we can benefit them and ourselves, and we can all synergistically benefit from cannabis here in Northern California.
Right.
And so I believe I became the first compliance officer, we call ourselves out here now. Because we were in compliance at that moment.
Right. It must have been a huge relief. Like, and the trust that you probably got with the local farmers in that area, if you didn't have it already, they're like, okay, that makes sense. Like, it's got to be an open dialogue and transparency with the government.
It was huge. But when my second year, instead of them learning from those lessons, that Kevin proved, to speak to your point, they were conditioned to not do it. So I left that farm I was on. They went without the zip ties, and they all got arrested.
Oh, man.
Yeah, no, because I take, wherever I go, I bring compliance with me. Right. I'm a compliance officer nowadays. And someone will say, who deputized you? Nobody. There's no officer part. It's just compliance guy. And that means you figure out what does the law say and you operate within it. That's where I call myself this Babylon Sherpa. Because Babylon, a term coming out of Jamaica for really government or the whole world of everything that's controlled, Babylon. And so this Babylon Sherpa idea that I sometimes put forward is people like me that can see government and grow or whatever. You have to navigate through the laws. And the laws are get licensed, stay compliant, be organized, and ultimately be transparent. And that's where Backbone comes in. Because I was doing all this, felt like on my own up here in Northern California. Mm-hmm. And people were coming to me. This company, Redwood Roots, is a friend of mine. All the brands would come and say, look, we want to be in compliance. We understand you're a compliance guy. What does that mean? And I would just lay out, well, this is what everyone agreed that we can do. As long as we do this times 100, we'll be okay. So what actually happened, Kevin, is that's a celebratory moment because the hoops we've been used to trying to jump through now are static.
Right.
And they're static. They may be still cumbersome, but they're static, and we know how to approach them and get in partnership with the government to have a license and operate a cannabis organization, which we're learning benefits the economy and poverty, alleviating poverty immensely.
Right.
If the government uses the funds wisely or in that way, not to mention the jobs. I'm in Arcata California. It's in Northern California in Humboldt. And it's consistent. What everybody's doing is they make these business parks of cannabis. They plan them out. And you can go to these parks and you can see, oh my God, today there's 1,000 people working. That's 1,000 people working.
Right. Exactly. Right. And
yeah, go ahead, Kevin. I'm talking too much. Please.
No, you're good. I want to ask you. So, like, it was a win in Medicino, right? Because you followed the rules. You worked with the local government, and people believed in that method, right? And you guys were able to operate. And then you left, and others didn't follow suit, and they were arrested. So when you moved, was your next location Humboldt? Is that where you located to next?
Yeah, and what happened is my kid, the one I told you was kind of on the floor. She said, Dad, we just moved from a city, from Chicago. I'm 8 years old. Now I'm living on the side of the hill. There's not one kid in, I don't know, 5 miles. This isn't going to work.
I need a friend. Yeah, exactly. And
so she became the boss. Closest town up here is Arcata. There's a school here, Humboldt State University. I've always traveled up here and I love it. And really what it's become, Kevin, is the heart of the cannabis movement in Humboldt. Humboldt's a big county. We kind of say Soham and Norham, but it's Humboldt County. Arcata is in Norham, but Soham, where the farming is going, in eastern Humboldt. All the brands live here. Mm-hmm. So we are like a Silicon Valley of cannabis. It's really exciting because then the conversations everywhere from the cafe to the grocery store are about improving on the processes of cannabis.
Right, so just getting better. Yeah.
That's what it seems to do. By having so many people focused on the same thing, it just seems to get better and better. And we meaning us admins, try to capsulate that in things like SOPs, standard operating procedures, and guardrails, things within Backbone that will help the operators maintain this high level of best practice. We see ourselves in Humboldt, something like Champagne or Burgundy, some region that has been branded, because of its excellence.
Right.
Around here, they'll use a bunch of terms, terroir, Appalachia. Those are different zones within Humboldt that are at different altitudes and moisture levels from the fog and things. And so we're very interested in what's ideal, what changes when you do this, what happens. It's pretty dorky.
No, it's very interesting. And it's like the perfect environment, right? I mean, that emerald triangle is just perfect environment for growing high quality flower. And so when you first got to Humboldt, like, was your kind of first course of action to approach the local law enforcement and say, okay, what is your criteria? What do I need to do to operate within compliance? Did you start that conversation first, or did you kind of learn it as you were talking to other growers in the area? Like, how did that all get started?
Thanks, Kevin. No, we pushed the conversation here in Humboldt. We all the growers made something called the Growers Alliance, Humboldt County Growers Alliance. We would engage the Humboldt planning department and say, look, we need. It was like constant. It was like 2-year-olds in a car going to grandma's house asking for laws to protect us, because the people here were they just want to be normal human beings and have a family.
Right.
And they do not want to live in fear. They need it to be over. It was critical mass and it's got to be over. Mm-hmm. And then when we got to the government, Humboldt, they said, well, all right, if you do it, you're going to have to spend a bunch of money to get legal because you can't be hurting the environment. Okay, we don't want to hurt the environment. Let's talk about that. We are agreeing with you. Well, what does a bunch of money mean? Well, now you got to capture all your water. Well, that's kind of a big deal. How do we capture enough water for the whole season? You got to buy 20 water tanks. And each one is like $3,000. So just to hold the water is $60,000. And then you have to, most people then were like, well, I'm going to dig a pond. To dig a pond is $1 million. Everything's money, Cav, is the point. But 3 years later, they've all spent it. This whole region spent that money and they've leveled up to do what the government has asked to do. So now when the regulators come out and they call themselves Fish and Wildlife or whatever they call themselves, they keep, there's actually changing going on in what they call themselves, but they'll come out see if it's okay, pretty much tell you you're fine or you're not. If you're not fine, this is our new camp now. The taking away of a license is now what everybody lives in fear of.
Wow.
So now the fear is real. It hasn't gone anywhere. It's just changed to, am I in compliance? I don't even know. Can't even understand this law. That's where people like me come in.
Right.
We translate it and we sit with grower and or manufacturer and we unpack everything. And we look at, are you okay here? Are you okay here? Are you okay here? Some people will call themselves compliance consultant. Unfortunately, Kevin, that has created a little bit of a predatory thing also, because wherever there's an aggregate of money, now you've got compliance consultants that actually live off the fear. They want you to be afraid so that you hire them, and then they'll tell you to be afraid so that you keep them.
Right. I've learned that that's such a bad word in the legal cannabis industry, is consultant. Like, people don't like that term.
Because of the coupling term would be gouger. You know, well, I'm $150 an hour, but I'll keep you in compliance. Wait, what? I have to spend $20,000 on you when I can do this myself if you just explain to me what I need to do?
Right, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and I consider myself a consultant, but I joined Backbone to stop, to just stop consulting. Because when you're consulting, you're really trying to be an expert of all these different things, and you're only as good as your client said you were. But at Backbone, I was like, you know what, this one-off thing is a big lift. I'd like to work on a system where the system collects all of the data that all the parties need to feel trust.
Dylan, what a perfect fit, like a perfect role for you to enter within Backbone, because like, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, when you were in Medicino, everybody was kind of coming to you as like, hey, are you the compliance guy? What do I need to do? What do I need to do? Right. So when you helped in the Mendocino County and then you moved, was Backbone the one that recruited you? Did you find Backbone? Like, how did that work out?
Thank you for saying that, Kev, because that's a good story. I was a business manager of a brand, a store, a dispensary, the only one in Southern Humboldt County, called Wonderland. And it was a nursery dispensary. Nursery obviously being crucial because the growers needed all their, we call them cuts, right? They needed their clones. So at Wonderland, we were really kind of the center of a lot of the SoHum universe. And the Backbone people, the principals, Rajesh and Vic, gentleman named Peter, they were interested in what should they build.
Peter Houston.
Didn't know.
Yeah.
They knew there was a problem, a series of problems, and that attracted them, or somehow they ended in the cannabis space, and they decided to come right to me and Wonderland and this gentleman, Kevin Jodry, and ask, what do you guys need? What's the problem? It was very innocent. It was very wonderful.
Serendipitous also. Wow.
Serendipitous. And people like Kevin, who are conditioned, all the old schoolers, to not write anything down because they don't want to go to jail. They don't want this to become evidence A, where they go to jail. They don't write anything down. The Backbone people came up and said, what's the problem? And Kevin was like, I don't know. I was like, you don't know? I know. The problem is we are losing trust. People are losing trust when they don't get good answers. He's like, what do you mean? We launched into this dialogue. Imagine that you, Kevin, were a grower and that you only grow 10 pounds a pot, let's say, but you know it's 10 pounds, and you've given it to me. I'm a trimmer, let's just say. Mm-hmm. Well, 2 weeks later, you're going to want to know, how's it going?
And if there's still 10 pounds left.
If there's still 10 pounds left, you're going to be like, what is going on? And now your bills are piling up. So that person who didn't trim your herb sometimes won't answer the phone. I don't know. I'm not sure what's going on. You're like, whoa, what just happened here?
Right.
That happened over and over. Specifically, Kevin, it happened when we turned into concentrate mania. Mm-hmm. Okay, there was flower forever, and you and I both know that it's at least 50% in the shops now are concentrate, vape pen, or dab, and the dabs are all concentrates. We could talk forever on different kinds of concentrates, and I want to. but specifically when you've given your pot away to a manufacturer and now you're supposed to get back oil, that's a big change. And what happened about 5 years ago is live resin happened and live rosin. It got really exciting and price points came up, and people, instead of making flowers, were giving their crops to these extractors, and they were freezing them, and putting them in the freezer. Well, that's great and not great, because there's no money when your stuff is in the freezer.
Right.
And you have so many bills to pay. Mm-hmm. So they would call me. At this time, about 4 years ago, I decided to be a distributor. When the first laws came, I'm like, oh, I can navigate these laws. I'm gonna be a distro. That's the spot. So I was a distributor, Humboldt's finest 420 and up here. And I'm trying to tie this all together, but ultimately, when you were a distributor, you are supposed to sell the end product, right? But the farmer who's waiting for the end product to be sold needs this information in the middle, this intelligence, to have peace of mind.
Sure.
And when they don't have it, they call. And if you say something like, look, I don't even know where your stuff is, I'm sorry, Kevin, they literally say things around here like, well, then I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to come and kill you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's their livelihood. It's yeah.
And even if they're not being truthful, they're just shaking, they're being threatening. Mm-hmm. And remember, we've got in this to have less fear and more safety. And I realized, well, this is a problem. Lack of transparency, lack of reporting is a problem. So I told the Backbone guys, look, if you guys build something, make it so that someone could watch their stuff all the way from beginning to end, anywhere within this, what they call supply chain.
So that's so awesome that you were able to collaborate with the leaders and founders of Backbone initially in that process, because you were on the front lines firsthand and saw these challenges, talking to these operators, these farmers, these distributors. So you were able to add value in that way from your purview, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And they appreciated that. They were on the tour of that. They wanted to see a bunch of me's, and so they started with me and did see a bunch of me's, I think. And then that was about 4 or 5 years ago. 3 years ago, they come back about a year after that conversation. They say, oh, we got our first draft. We love it. What do you think, Dylan? And I was like, I like it. I like it. And this kind of I like it is a big deal, because I've been trying to get at this data organization now for decades.
Right. And that's exactly what you've been working at. Yeah.
Exactly what I've been working at. These gentlemen dropped in, and ladies, and there's a whole great crew from Silicon Valley. They put together software people that had an interest in cannabis, and they combined their expertise with me, Peter, who is a cannabis expertise, a couple other cannabis people, and we fused it together to build this platform called Backbone. And it's a platform, I call it, because it's really just the beginning. There's a lot of analytics that can happen, but it's the data warehouse, it's the foundation, it's the core of the data of happening in your license, right? And that's when the government likes it, because the government, when they give you a license, one of the things they expect is that you will have your data organized and be able to report to them.
Right.
And Backbone makes it simple for that. They use these terms, track and trace, right? Track and trace. Well, now, if you wanted to count the people that have gotten sick on cannabis in the whole country, you would need like one finger or something. Like nobody, like it's legal all over, but there still has not some wave of trace it back to who got this person sick. But we have it. Wow. It's in place. It's in place so much so that if this pen makes someone not feel good, you can trace it all the way back to the manufacturer, trace it back to the grower, and Backbone has all that information.
Right.
But that's just the beginning. There's the costing, Kevin, the COGS. How much does it cost to make this pen? And the cost. I keep showing a pen.
Yeah, for those listening, it's not an actual cartridge. It's a regular writing pen. We get it.
I'm talking about when people make cannabis pens. This one happens to be a group called Dosist. And the reason they're dosist is because when you suck on this pen after you get your dose, it shakes at you so that you don't overdose,
which is super important. Dosing. Yeah, absolutely.
Super important. So yeah, there's that. That's another thing, dosing. But anyway, to make that pen, if you don't know how much that costs, you don't know how much you're blind. You don't really know if your business is okay. So
And
that
would
yeah.
you say like 90% before Backbone entered the Mendocino, the Humboldt area and work with these operators? Like what was the percentage of people that just really didn't know operations and how much money they were losing, inventory, SOPs, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, 100%.
100%.
Yeah,
So
there was 100% of people doing what they knew was working, but they weren't writing things down, and they weren't therefore able to transfer that knowledge to people who were coming into the industry, of which there's a million, without talking at them all day.
And to be fair, I mean, it's the concern of legality, right? I mean, like you said earlier, they didn't want to write this stuff down and have physical evidence, if in fact law enforcement came busting down their doors and could use that in court later on,
Yeah,
right?
and have used it every single time they've prosecuted somebody. Yeah, so yes, it's like
Wow.
a proof of concept that if you write it down, it will be used against you. Now, that had to change. You have to write it down in order to stay compliant. That's a radical change. And that's
Sure.
when I re-brought back the term radical transparency, because transparency solves all the problems. No one's hiding anything. So there isn't any fear. There isn't any questions. It's kind of like, here's what it is. And the only time there's a problem is if someone didn't use the system well or made some mistake.
Right.
Because now when the government needs information, they can ask the user goes right to the system. Or when the user needs information, they go right to the system. It's right there for them. And that's why we call it Backbone. It's really the foundation of peace of mind. The term we really like best, or I like best, is a single source of truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you have a single source of truth, then you don't have what we've experienced in the last 2 years is opinion.
Right. Right. Yeah. I
So
mean, without data, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Right. And so that's just kind of basic. You need to kind of have processes in place where, like you said, if the government ever steps in, law enforcement, and they need to see data or information, you have it at your disposal and
yep,
it's in real time.
yep.
And with Backbone, so the origin story is pretty fascinating, and the fact that you were involved, initially, and others, of course, throughout the country, but especially in Humboldt County, is amazing. And so now, Dylan, you sit as the executive of strategic partnerships. So why don't you talk a little bit about your role at Backbone and what Backbone's kind of focus is for the remainder of 2021 and beyond?
Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't really sit exactly executive of strategic partnerships, though I work in that arena with some
Okay,
wonderful people, specifically a woman named Nikki. What I'm mostly doing is implementing the system.
got you.
And
Okay,
so they call me a solutions architect,
okay.
which is funny because architect is an interesting word. I'm not building a building, but you're building a system. And it is unique to every manufacturer and or grower or any business because they have developed their own individual processes. So what Backbone is available to them to do is shape shift it until it matches perfect so that it's kind of a natural extension of their operation. Kind of sometimes I'll say it's like if you're going to a wedding and you buy a nice suit, like even a Armani or Versace suit, it could be the greatest suit in the world, but if it's flapping around and looking ridiculous, you'll still be ridiculous.
Right.
You have to take the time to tailor it. And sometimes you tailor it 3 times. That's what I do. We iterate on the system with the client until it matches. Until it finally matches. And then there's this aha moment, like, aha, okay, this system is what I do. Let's use it. Now, what use it means is it actually links to the regulatory systems in California called metric. And so what happens is the operators that were using the government, kind of the DMV of sites metric, which is chain of custody, now they use a backbone to have way more intelligence that links to the chain of custody site metric to make sure that you're in compliance and that everything is traceable.
It integrates with the governmental platform.
It integrates with the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how long, when you talk about customizing the platform for a specific client, tailoring, how long typically does that process take?
Takes about a month.
Okay.
And then in the next month, we double, triple test it together. 2 months. Now I could truncate the 2 months into 2 weeks if I worked with one. If you were an operator, you're like, we got to go. Me and you could get her done in 2 weeks, but we'd have to focus. There's work to
Sure.
do, and so it takes 2 months because everybody's busy. And so what people like me do, I come see you once every 2 days or something. We look at where we are, we work on it a little, we beta test it more. We do a lot of reiterating and testing. It takes your time.
Right.
So it's kind of also strategic for someone like me to know how to implement it without you losing productivity. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do.
Right. You don't
So,
want, yeah.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So we're pretty good at it, though. I mean, we're pretty good at it. Because I've sat in both seats, I can tell when someone has no way, there's no way I can do this, and I can tell when they can push forward. And then we actually use a lot of very good project management tools to keep everybody on track. And then by the end of the 2 months, there's this handoff in our organization from professional services, where I sit, to customer success, different shape of the same entity that we are, but the customer success people will stay with that client forever till perpetuity.
Right.
And with me at ProServe, I'm mostly trying to get that client happy and using it. Then what we'll learn, Kevin, because we're humans, right, is people will get expert and then they'll want to level up, go next level,
Sure.
which always excites me, because next level at the platform like this means integrating with cool things, integrating with your accounting system, your QuickBooks or your Intact, or integrating with your menu system, LeafLink, or integrating with your GMP, which is good manufacturing system, good manufacturing practices. So these integrations excite me because it makes the program even more powerful.
Yeah, I would imagine that there's even probably sometimes where you're working with a specific client that wants to level up and you're like, oh, this could be a whole new feature or functionality that fits your processes perfectly, right? And kind of thinking outside of the box, even outside of integrations.
Exactly. Even production orders is a thing we just launched. We had to say, how do you do this? And they were like, we want to know that we need to build 5,000 of these. We need to work against it. So we learned that from the operator. I didn't even really think of that, because I didn't think in terms of production order. I was like, we're always producing. They came to me and said, no, now it's different. We got 5,000 of this, 5,000 of this, 5,000 of this. So we pivoted, and I don't know about pivot. We added functionality to Backbone where it's a purchase order, a purchase. It's a production order. I'm sorry, Kevin, a production order. And that means how many do we need to produce, as opposed to purchase order, which is already there. Purchase
Right.
order being the beginning of our system. Production order being like, okay, if you're purchasing cannabis and carts to make these pens, or you're purchasing distillate oil and these carts, how do you put them together? When you put them together, how does the cost change? When it's the labor is associated to it, what's the change in cost there? And then in the end, what's your margin? Are you profitable or not? And in cannabis, just to be quite candid, there has been less time spent on that than on go, 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 go.
Mm-hmm.
So
And sometimes it's almost a detriment to the end consumer, right? Because if you're not effectively monitoring your costs and what it takes to produce a product and then your margins, you tend to sometimes go the cheaper route to cut corners that could be harmful to the end consumer, right? Whether it be the cart itself or the oil that's in the cart and so on.
that's
So,
right, Kevin. That's a good point. Lack of transparency or lack of knowing everything could sometimes result in assumptions. It always.
mm-hmm,
And they
mm-hmm,
make these assumptions on what's the best way to proceed. And this solves that. And now they make analytical decisions. Oh, well, last time we bought these, what if we do this? Now we're starting to see them use it in a projectorial type of way. What if we were to do this other thing? Would we have more? Specifically, if we're making pre-rolls, what if we combined twist and production in one space? Would that increase productivity? They'll try them both, Kevin, and our system will allow them then to do a side-by-side comparative analysis so that they could determine whether they want to make a change in their business practices or not.
wow, that is powerful. I mean, we've talked a lot about the California market. I mean, but Backbone's a nationwide company, right? So you serve all markets, is that right?
International action.
International, excuse me. Yes, international.
because we have clients. Cannabis is not American specific, as we know. Cannabis is a worldwide phenomenon.
Right.
Um, and so we find producers everywhere, and all the producers have similar set of problems. And most of them are around organizing the data to be able to report with transparency what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So we find common problems internationally around cannabis. And that's why we're able to use our wins or our successes in one area and kind of hub the whole world then in cannabis up level.
Are those problems that you address globally, are there kind of commonalities between different regions or countries throughout the world that you see, or is it all just kind of all over the place when it comes to the problems that these operators face?
If you ask me that question in a year from now, I probably have more. I'd say right now, I'm seeing that things are different. Everybody is trying things in different ways. We were in Barbados, and that's
Wow.
a different thing than Israel. Is a different thing than Jamaica. We got
Sure.
projects. So everybody is trying. These hoops that I said have been created by every local government everywhere. So this Babylon Sherpa-ing, it has to happen everywhere, and not by me, but by whoever happens to be trying to navigate that marketplace. And so they like a backbone because they feel that we have been on their side forever, because we have, even though they just found us today, let's say.
Right.
It's like Backbone is not rushing to find out what does someone need. It's saying we did rush to find out what a lot of people need, and now we're working on it. Can this be helpful to you? And is there anything you're doing different that can actually help the entire industry? It's
Right.
not like we're going to share anybody's practices, be quite the opposite. But what we do notice is that the operators share their own practices once they're really stoked about it.
Mm-hmm. And this data organization, extreme transparency, as you put it, is super important. To your point, to move the industry forward and to move the needle, right? The less compliant we are, the more of a detriment it'll be to the industry. And so services like Backbones are absolutely needed. And I love the company name because, like you said earlier, it's the backbone of what you're needing to actually operate successfully and within compliance in the space.
Yep.
It's amazing. And so I want to ask you, Dylan, what are y'all like focused on? What are your kind of goals for the remainder of this year or even in the coming years?
Well, we've done a pretty good job now of organizing the data for people. People could see their yields. People could see everything that happened, the WIP, where in process are things. We've done a very good job at that. I'm feeling very accomplished on that level. I'd say what we're probably wanting to do to make a Dylan happy, who's never really I'm always going to be pushing something. To make me happy, it would be nice if instead of calling our customer, a stakeholder calling our customer and them having to look in the system and send a report, it would be nice for me if the stakeholders were able to log into Backbone and see their own project. It's very challenging in this compliant marketplace because you can't share other people's data. So that kind of like narrow view of my project in your system would be something I would like, a login, so to speak, just to see where in process is my stuff. That'll come down the road. I'll be happier when that happens. And then the other thing, I'll be very happy when the accounting systems are seamlessly integrated. Accounting, I have 10 years bookkeeping here in Humboldt, and I've been a chief financial officer for a lot of brands. And accounting is it doesn't come natural to cannabis operators. I mean, maybe selling pot does, but the COGSing and the whole chart of accounts doesn't. So when we can make our backbone system integrate really seamlessly, that'll be even more exciting to me. Right now it integrates and I'm in the middle of the integration of those two things. It's happening.
Sure.
It's a little cumbersome is all, but like everything when you develop it for the first time, it's 1.0 or 2.0, and then you get to then you get to the real magic.
And that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, that's just kind of the natural progression of technology platforms, right? It's like you start off with version 1 and then you say you add on to it. You add different features and functionality because first of all, first and foremost, you can't be everything right out the gate, right? And you naturally learn what your customers need based off of their own situation, right? Their own kind of operation. And so
Exactly.
you just kind of learn and build on that. And those two features that you mentioned, I think would be great. I mean, the view of having the login and the back end where you can just, in real time check whatever you need, whatever data you need at that time would be awesome. And so
Yep.
we'll be looking out for that update, Dylan, and I'll be sure to share that with the audience so that they're aware. As we wrap up, I want to ask you, I know that you were going back to your story about when you were first invited to be a legal grower in Mendocino. I know you were featured in an article that was titled 5 Things I Wish Someone Told Me Before I Started Leading a Cannabis Business. So to wrap up, Dylan, why don't you just go ahead and reiterate what you said in that article for those listening who are thinking about entering the cannabis space?
Okay, this will be fun because I don't remember exactly what I said, but I'm going to say the 5 things that are important to me. Like number 1, the government is on your side. The grower community is traumatized. They have always been criminal. And the government is not trying to prosecute these people. They're trying to benefit from the economics of the situation, the economics of the situation. And therefore, when I say the government's on your side, I'm not talking about the cops, I'm talking about the regulators. When you're trying to get licensing or when you're being even audited, if you take the position that I'm in trouble, then they become not on your side. But if you take a position that you're in partnership with the government to provide a successful service and product to humanity in a way that the government feels appropriate, then you can both benefit. So anytime you approach the government, it's good to know in the back of your head that they're really not against you. They want you to succeed because your success, they succeed when you get a license.
Right.
When you're successful. And number 2, transparency being absolutely crucial. There is no telling a story anymore in cannabis that is not able to be backed up by fact, because a reaction to what we've all been through, which is this kind of yellow journalism, shape-shifting, say whatever you want to, is don't do that. Just show me the data. Show me where the pot was in its raw form, where it is in the middle, where it is in the end. Don't put an opinion on it. Kind of this raw data, transparency being the creator of trust.
Right.
I'd say number 3, it's really important to know that you can't do anything alone in this marketplace.
Amen to that.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Even your podcast probably it's teamwork makes the dream work, and there's no other place that's more prevalent than here.
100%. I mean, I've had over 200 guests and I didn't recruit all those. I had help, people recommended others and, introduced me to these experts. So you're absolutely right.
Number 4, I think, I didn't say this in the other time, but embracing the alternative voices, or at least hearing them, helps us understand what their problems are. Like, I was really appreciative when you pointed me to someone that you had on the show that had, a perspective of maybe we shouldn't do this. It's important for us to hear those things because we're not trying to shove anything down anybody's throat. We are literally trying to support the natural evolution of what the plant is doing. That sounds super hippy dippy, but that's how I feel.
No, it's beautifully put. I think you're absolutely right. It is a natural force that is moving at light speed, and there's evidence of that from the United States in its recent poll of public support, and we're at 92%, right? So that tells us that the people want more access to it. They don't think it's harmful, like how it's been, spewed and lied about in the past. And so we need to have these hard conversations with people who oppose so that we can grow and regulate and enforce the right way.
Thank you. That's how I feel. And truth will set us free. And that's what Backbone's trying to do. Have
Right.
all the truth in one place, single source of truth. And then the fifth thing then is if you have a single source of truth, if you have good systems, you can reclaim your time. In this industry, may be different than others. There's constant questions. We have these people called farmer manager. They'll want to know what happened with my pot. Did you sell it? Blah blah blah. Did you do this? Did you do that? Constantly looking for information, which slows down the ability to do the work. So
Right.
this reclaiming of your time, I think, is important so that people, even in your own organization, don't call you, ask you what's going on with the project. They just go in and see. So we have this like in FedEx and Amazon and everywhere in the world has these practices of go in and see, but cannabis doesn't. Cannabis is call the guy. But we've hit a critical point. We're now commercial. Don't call the guy. Go to the system. Ask for a report from the system. Let a system like Backbone give you a auditable, truthful report. And then we're all sharing the same information and speaking the same language.
Mhm. It's very sound advice, Dylan. I couldn't agree more with all the five, points that you made there. And once again, Backbone is doing really important work, and it's definitely something that if it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? So if you're not documenting and you're not being transparent now, with regulation being inevitable, it's important to consider platforms like Backbone to help support your operations. So I want to just thank you again for your insights and sharing your experience with the plan and both your personal and professional careers, Dylan. And as you guys announce more news and do great things within the industry, I'd love to have you back on so we can talk more about those updates.
Thanks, Kevin. There'd be no industry without this kind of conversation of spreading the word. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I'm not going to stop. We're going to continue educating, my man. So
All right.
thanks again. And where can people find Backbone's website and social media if they want to learn more?
BackboneIQ.com and just go from there.
And then you can just search all the social
You can
stuff.
even see me on there. And if you search in the team, you can hit Dylan and then, you can learn more about Babylon Sherpa like we talked about. But yeah, BackboneIQ.com is a good place to find us. And come to Humboldt and we can do tours also. Tours just meaning like, come on out here and I'll just walk you around the redwoods and we'll see if there's pot at the end of the street.
Dylan, I'm going to take you up on that. I want to get out to Humboldt, man. I want to try that high quality, Humboldt flower. That's
Yeah.
really kind of one thing on my bucket list. So I'll
Thanks
look
for
you up.
saying high quality at the end, Kev. I don't mean to cut you off, but quality is really the whole thing. And we're really just trying to capsulate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You guys are known for it. So
Thank you.
awesome. Well, thanks again. And thank you all for listening. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.